The sky over Pine Ridge dawned with heavy clouds that Monday morning. Emily Anderson watched through the window of the rustic cabin while brewing coffee. Her son, Ben, only 2 years old, played on the living room carpet with the colorful blocks he loved so much. Ryan, her husband, was packing their last bags to return to the city. "I think we should stay one more day," suggested Ryan, approaching his wife and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Look at this weather, Em. It doesn't seem safe to drive down the mountain with this fog." Emily sighed, torn between the desire to remain in this sanctuary and the responsibility awaiting her at the health clinic. "I can't, Ryan. I have 3 appointments scheduled with children who have traveled from far away. Besides, the forecast didn't indicate a storm, just a passing drizzle." Ryan knew that determined look in his wife's eyes well. A respected pediatrician in the region, Emily devoted herself body and soul to her little patients. It was this dedication that made him fall in love with her 7 years ago when he arrived in Pine Ridge to photograph Silver Canyon. "All right," he conceded, kissing her forehead. "But let's take it easy on the road." While they were having coffee, Grandmother Lucy, Emily's mother, called. The connection was poor due to the remote location of the cabin, but her words came through clearly. "Sweetheart, I had a strange dream last night. I saw Ben on the back of a silver horse entering the forest. Please don't come today." Emily exchanged worried glances with Ryan. Her mother had always had premonitory dreams, something that Emily, with her scientific background, tried to rationalize, but secretly respected. "Mom, they're just dreams. We'll be home for lunch, I promise." An hour later, the family was in the car. Ben, settled in his car seat, soon fell asleep to the sound of the light rain that had begun to fall. As they descended the mountain, the sky darkened rapidly. "This doesn't look like a passing drizzle," commented Ryan, reducing his speed. The windshield wipers could barely handle the water that was now falling heavily. "It came on very suddenly," agreed Emily, trying to check the forecast on her phone. "No signal. We're on our own here." That's when they spotted the fallen tree, huge, completely blocking the winding road. Ryan stepped on the brake, but the wet asphalt betrayed the tire's grip. The car skidded, spinning to the edge of the cliff. The impact left both adults unconscious. In the silence that followed, only Ben's frightened crying echoed inside the damaged vehicle, now dangerously tilted toward the precipice. From among the trees that lined the road emerged a majestic silhouette. A horse with a silver coat, golden eyes, and an imposing stature approached the vehicle. This was no ordinary animal. Its presence radiated an ancestral energy, as if it were part of Silver Canyon itself. With surprising precision, the mysterious equine managed to open the rear door of the car with its teeth. Using delicate movements, it broke the straps of Ben's car seat and, with incredible skill, lifted the boy by his clothes, placing him on its back. The child's crying ceased almost instantly upon feeling contact with the animal. Before departing, the horse looked at the unconscious Emily and Ryan. It neighed loudly, as if calling for help, and then disappeared into the dense forest with its precious passenger. Hours later, in the Pine Ridge Hospital, Emily awoke with a start. Her body ached, but the first thing she noticed was Ben's absence. "My son! Where is my son?" she shouted, trying to get up. Ryan, in the bed next to her, also woke up with the commotion. The doctor and nurses tried to calm them down, but panic had already set in. "You were found alone in the car, Dr. Anderson," explained Dr. Paul. "There was no child in the vehicle when the rescue team arrived." Isabella Stewart, a forest ranger, and Emily's childhood friend, entered the room at that moment. Her expression was grave but determined. "We already have search teams in the accident area. We'll find him, Em, I promise." On the other side of town, Grandmother Lucy felt her heart tighten. Sitting on the porch of her house, she looked at the now clear sky, as if the storm had never existed. In her mind, the image of the silver horse carrying her grandson became increasingly vivid. "It's protecting the boy," she murmured to herself. "The guardian of Silver Canyon has chosen Ben." The news of Ben's disappearance spread quickly through Pine Ridge. Within hours, dozens of volunteers joined the official search teams. The small town, always united, mobilized like never before to find Emily and Ryan's son. At the hospital, against medical recommendations, the couple insisted on being discharged to join the search. Dr. Paul tried to argue, concerned about their injuries and emotional state. "You need to rest. Leave the search work to the specialized teams," he insisted. "My son is out there alone," Emily countered, already putting on her shoes. "I won't lie here while that's happening." Ryan, equally determined, organized a group of photographers and guides he knew from the region to cover other areas of Silver Canyon. The pain and guilt in his eyes were palpable. "I should have insisted we stay at the cabin," he lamented while they waited for discharge papers. "Your mother warned us." Emily squeezed his hand. "This isn't the time to blame ourselves, Ryan. We need to find our son." Outside the hospital, Isabella efficiently coordinated the search groups. When she saw Emily and Ryan coming out, she quickly approached them. "You should be resting," she said with a concerned expression. "But since I know you won't change your mind, come with me. There's something you need to see." Isabella took them to her jeep and drove toward the accident site. On the way, she explained what they had found. "Around the car, we identified tracks from a large animal. They look like horse tracks, but larger than normal. And there's something strange about them." "What would that be?" asked Ryan, clinging to any hope. "The tracks don't come from anywhere. They begin exactly next to the car and lead into the forest, as if the animal appeared out of nowhere." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The image from her mother's dream instantly came to mind. When they arrived at the site, the search team was working methodically. The car had already been removed, but the area was cordoned off to preserve evidence. Isabella guided them to where the mysterious tracks began. "Look," she pointed. "They follow in that direction, entering the forest through a path that isn't on any official maps." Ryan, experienced in Silver Canyon trails due to his work as a photographer, furrowed his brow. "I don't recognize this path, and I know practically every trail in this region." "Exactly," agreed Isabella. "That's why we've assembled a special team to follow these tracks. But there's another important detail." She hesitated before continuing. "We found pieces of Ben's car seatbelt next to the car. They seem to have been cut or bitten." Emily's blood ran cold. Before she could process the information, they heard a voice calling. "Emily, Ryan." It was Grandmother Lucy, approaching, while leaning on her cane, accompanied by an elderly man few in town knew. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "You should be resting," said Emily, hugging her mother. "I brought someone who can help. This is Old Joe, the oldest resident of Pine Ridge. He knows the stories of Silver Canyon like no one else." The old man, his skin wrinkled by the sun and his eyes penetrating, observed the tracks in silence for a few moments before speaking. "The Guardian took the boy," he stated, with a certainty that left everyone perplexed. "And if he took him, it was to protect him." "Guardian, what story is this?" questioned Ryan between confusion and hope. "A legend as old as these mountains," replied Old Joe. "The Guardian of Silver Canyon is an ancestral spirit that takes the form of a silver horse. It protects this place and sometimes chooses to protect someone special." Isabella, always rational, intervened. "Old Joe, with all due respect, we need concrete facts to find the boy." The old man smiled understandingly. "The facts are before your eyes, young lady. These tracks, the unusual behavior of the animal, the disappearance during the storm, everything fits the stories my grandfather told me." While they were discussing, one of the members of the search team approached running. "We found something." About a kilometer into the forest following the tracks. Everyone anxiously followed the man. After a difficult walk through the dense vegetation, they reached a small clearing. In the center, on a flat stone, was a drawing made with colored clay, the silhouette of a horse and a small figure that looked like a boy. "It's a sign," murmured Grandmother Lucy, emotional. "Or someone wanting to confuse us," argued Isabella, always cautious. Ryan approached the drawing and noticed something more, small human footprints the size of Ben's, moving away from the stone toward the east. "He's alive," he exclaimed, feeling tears of relief spring to his eyes. "And he seems to be moving on his own." Emily hugged her husband, allowing herself, for the first time since the accident, to feel a glimmer of hope. However, daylight was already beginning to fade, and the Silver Canyon forest was dangerous at night. "We have to continue the search," declared Isabella, But we need reinforcements and equipment to face the night in the forest. While they were organizing the next steps, no one noticed the elegant figure observing everything from a distance. Wilson, the ecotourism businessman, listened to every word with growing interest, his ambitious gaze fixed on the direction indicated by the tracks. The guardian of Silver Canyon, he murmured to himself. Finally, the opportunity I've been waiting for. Night fell over Silver Canyon, bringing with it a sky full of stars and a silence that seemed to amplify every sound of the forest. The search. Teams now equipped with flashlights and communication equipment organized themselves into groups to continue the search for Ben. Emily refused to return to town, despite Isabella's insistence that she rest and resume the search in the morning. Every minute is precious, she argued. I won't abandon my son in the forest during the night. Ryan, equally determined, checked his night vision camera and GPS. As a nature photographer, he was accustomed to nighttime expeditions, valuable knowledge at that moment. We're wasting time with so much organization, Isabella, he said, impatient. The tracks are clear. We need to follow them while we can still identify them. Grandmother Lucy, who had insisted on remaining at the site, approached her son-in-law with a serene expression that contrasted with the general tension. Ryan, remember what old Joe said. If the Guardian took Ben, it was to protect him, not to harm him. With all due respect, Grandmother Lucy, intervened Isabella, we cannot base our search strategies on legends. We need to be methodical and rational. Old Joe, who was observing the discussion sitting on a rock, stood up with difficulty and pointed to the starry sky. On moonless nights like this, the Guardian takes its protégés to White Rock, he said, firmly. That's where you should look. White Rock? Questioned Emily. I've never heard of that place, and I grew up in this region. Few know it, replied the old man. It's in the heart of Silver Canyon, where the ancients performed ceremonies, a place of power. Isabella consulted her detailed maps of the region, but found no reference to such a place. Old Joe, could you give us some more concrete indication about the location of this rock? The old man smiled enigmatically. Follow the path of the inverted waters. Before anyone could question the meaning of that cryptic phrase, one of the volunteers approached running. We found something strange. 2 kilometers from here, a kind of improvised camp with food and, well, you need to see for yourselves. Quickly, the main group, including Emily, Ryan, Isabella, and some forest rangers, followed the volunteer down a narrow trail, illuminated only by flashlights. They arrived at a small clearing where, to everyone's surprise, there was a simple structure made of branches and leaves, similar to a shelter. It looks recent, observed Isabella, carefully examining the construction. And look at this. She pointed to what appeared to be a horsehoof print impressed on a nearby stone. Beside the mark were pieces of partially eaten fruit and an empty water bottle that Ryan immediately recognized. This bottle was in our backpack, in the car, he said, picking up the object. How did it get here? And that's not all, added the volunteer who had brought them there. See what's in the center of the shelter. In the middle of the improvised structure was a small bed made of soft leaves, and on it Ben's favorite blanket, the one without which the boy couldn't sleep. Emily picked it up with trembling hands and brought it to her face, smelling her son's scent. He was here, she murmured through tears. Recently. Ryan hugged his wife, sharing her emotion. For the first time since the accident, they had concrete proof that their son was alive. But who built this? Questioned Isabella, perplexed. A 2-year-old child couldn't make something like this. The Guardian has allies, replied old Joe, who had arrived limping, supported by Grandmother Lucy. The protectors of Silver Canyon have always existed among us. While they were discussing the implications of that discovery, Ryan noticed something that had gone unnoticed. Small drawings made with colored clay on the inner walls of the shelter. He brought his flashlight closer and saw representations of a horse, a child, and more intriguingly, a large shining rock. White Rock, murmured old Joe upon seeing the drawings. He's showing the way. Isabella, although skeptical about legends, couldn't deny the evidence before her. Okay, assuming this Guardian is taking Ben to such a rock, how do we find it? Old Joe pointed to one of the drawings, where wavy lines crossed in an unusual way. The path of the inverted waters, where the river flows upward. Ryan's eyes brightened with sudden understanding. The inverted waterfall. I discovered that place on one of my photography expeditions. It's a rare phenomenon where, under certain wind conditions, the water from the waterfall appears to rise instead of fall. Exactly, confirmed the old man. White rock is above that waterfall, hidden by a curtain of water when seen from afar. Isabella consulted her map again. That's at least a 4-hour walk from here, crossing areas of difficult access. Then we have no time to lose, declared Emily, standing up determined, still holding Ben's blanket. While the group was preparing for the new expedition, no one noticed the small and silent drone hovering among the treetops, transmitting images and sounds to a luxurious camp established on the edge of Silver Canyon. Wilson observed everything on his tablet, a satisfied smile on his lips. Beside him, 2 men with hunting equipment awaited instructions. White rock, he said, without taking his eyes off the screen. Get ready, we'll leave in an hour. I want to get there before them. And what about the horse, sir? Asked one of the men. The Guardian of Silver Canyon will be the main attraction of my new resort, replied Wilson. A legendary creature that will bring tourists from all over the world. And the child, insisted the man. The businessman finally raised his eyes, his gaze cold as ice. The priority is the horse. The rest are details. Dawn found the group already moving through the dense forest of Silver Canyon. Led by Ryan, who knew the way to the inverted waterfall, they advanced as quickly as the rugged terrain allowed. Emily walked right behind her husband, the physical and emotional exhaustion visible on her face, but the determination intact in her eyes. Isabella maintained contact via radio with the other search teams, who continued checking alternative areas. Although still skeptical about the Guardian story, she couldn't ignore the evidence they had found in the improvised shelter. If the boy is really being taken to this white rock, we should find him in a few hours, she commented, consulting her GPS. But the terrain gets increasingly difficult from here. I know shortcuts, stated Ryan, avoiding a thorny bush. I used to photograph in this area frequently. Grandmother Lucy, who had insisted on accompanying them despite her advanced age, walked with surprising energy, supported sometimes by her cane, sometimes by Old Joe. The 2 elderly people seemed to share a silent understanding about what they were about to find. The forest is different today, observed Old Joe, looking around. More alert, more alive. It knows we're coming. Emily, educated to see the world through the lens of science, found herself increasingly receptive to the old man's words. The experience of the last 24 hours had shaken her most fundamental certainties. Do you really believe my son is safe? She asked, approaching Old Joe during a brief rest pause. The old man smiled gently. The Guardian doesn't choose just anyone, Dr. Emily. If he took your boy, it's because Ben has an important purpose. What purpose could a 2-year-old child have? She questioned, between hope and disbelief. Children see what we, adults, forget to see, he replied enigmatically, and Silver Canyon needs pure eyes now, more than ever. Before they could continue the conversation, a distant sound caught everyone's attention, the noise of falling water, but with a strange acoustics, as if the sound was being distorted. The inverted waterfall, announced Ryan, excited. We're close. The group quickened their pace, the vegetation gradually opening up until they found themselves on a slope that offered a panoramic view of the phenomenon, a waterfall of approximately 100 feet that, due to a constant upward air current in that valley, had part of its water rising instead of falling, creating a surreal spectacle of brilliant drops rising to the sky. It's magnificent, murmured Isabella, momentarily forgetting the mission in the face of natural beauty. And, look, pointed Old Joe to the base of the waterfall, the Guardian's tracks. Indeed, on the rocky bank of the small lake formed by the waterfall, unmistakable marks of large, deep hooves headed toward the side of the waterfall, where the rock formed a narrow passage, partially hidden by the curtain of water. Ryan immediately prepared to follow the path indicated by the tracks, but Isabella stopped him. Wait, something's wrong. She pointed to recent marks in the surrounding vegetation. Someone else has been here recently. Emily's heart raced. Do you think someone found Ben before us? These aren't rescue tracks, replied Isabella, examining the marks carefully. See how the vegetation was deliberately damaged, as if someone wanted to hide their passage but was in a hurry. Hunters, concluded Ryan, with a grim expression. But who would be hunting in this protected area, and why? Old Joe and Grandmother Lucy exchanged worried glances. The Guardian, murmured Emily's mother. Someone must have heard the stories and come after it. A chill ran down everyone's spine. If the legend was true, and the mystical horse really existed, it would be an incalculable trophy for an unscrupulous hunter. And Ben is with him, concluded Emily, panic growing in her voice. Without wasting any more time, the group quickly advanced to the passage behind the waterfall. The crossing was challenging, with slippery rocks and the constant mist from the water making visibility difficult, but desperation gave them strength and agility. As they emerged on the other side, they were momentarily dazzled. A natural chamber opened before them, illuminated by small openings in the rocky ceiling. The sunlight, filtered through crystals embedded in the walls, created a spectacle of colors that danced upon what occupied the center of the space. An enormous rock of white quartz, which seemed to glow with its own light. "White rock," whispered Old Joe reverently. But there was no sign of Ben or the Guardian. Instead, they found disturbing evidence. Recent human footprints, remnants of packaged food, and more alarmingly, a used tranquilizer dart thrown near the entrance. "We arrived late," stated Isabella, examining the dart. "Someone was here at most an hour ago." "No," disagreed Old Joe, approaching White Rock. "Look more carefully." The old man pointed to symbols engraved at the base of the rock, ancient drawings depicting the Guardian, humans, and what appeared to be a rudimentary map of the region. "This is a sacred place," he explained. "The Guardian wouldn't be captured so easily here. It knows passages that humans don't." As if to confirm his words, a distant neigh echoed through the rocky walls coming from somewhere deeper in the mountain. "Ben!" shouted Emily, running in the direction of the sound, with Ryan right behind her. At the opposite end of the chamber, partially hidden by rock formations, they discovered a narrow opening, a natural passage that led deeper into the mountain. "The ancestral tunnels," revealed Old Joe. "They say they connect all of Silver Canyon underground." Isabella, preparing her flashlight, observed drag marks near the entrance of the tunnel. "It looks like someone was dragged inside, or something was dragged out." "The hunters," concluded Ryan, tense. "Or the Guardian," taking Ben further away from them. Everyone's breath was suspended when, from the dark interior of the tunnel, they heard an unmistakable sound. The happy, crystalline laughter of a child, followed by the powerful neigh of what could only be the Guardian of Silver Canyon. "He's alive," exclaimed Emily, tears of relief running down her face. "My son is alive." But before they could advance through the tunnel, the distant sound of male voices and heavy equipment began to echo from outside the chamber. Someone else was arriving at White Rock, and it didn't seem to be part of the official search teams. "Hide," ordered Isabella, quickly turning off her flashlight. "We need to know who they are and what they want before making any move." The group quickly hid behind the rock formations as the voices approached the entrance of the chamber. Isabella, with the experience of a forest ranger, positioned herself strategically to observe without being seen. Soon, 3 men entered the space, their footsteps echoing through the crystal cave. Leading the group was an elegant figure, dressed in expensive clothes that completely contrasted with the wild environment. Wilson, his angular face displayed an expression of fascination as he contemplated White Rock. "Magnificent," he murmured, approaching the giant crystal with calculated reverence. "Worth every penny invested in this expedition." The 2 men accompanying him carried sophisticated equipment, a small drone, tranquilizers, ropes, and what appeared to be a collapsible cage. "Mr. Wilson," called one of them, examining the ground. "The animal's tracks go through that tunnel, and there are small marks too, probably from the child." "Excellent," replied the businessman, his gaze now fixed on the passage. "The plan continues as expected. We capture the horse and return the boy to his parents, becoming the heroes of the story." The publicity will be perfect for the resort. D'Alanche. Emily had to contain a cry of indignation while Ryan held her firmly. The revelation was shocking. Wilson wasn't there to help, but to exploit the situation for his own benefit. "We have to act," whispered Isabella to the group. "They're armed and determined." Old Joe, however, made a gesture asking for calm. "The rock will choose its moment," he murmured enigmatically. As if responding to his words, the giant crystal began to emit a soft glow, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually increasing. The men stopped, astonished by the phenomenon. "What's happening?" questioned one of the henchmen, instinctively backing away. Wilson, however, advanced fascinated toward the rock. "This is it. The legend was right. The rock really has powers." The glow intensified, and from the dark tunnel came a powerful neigh that made the walls of the cave vibrate. Seconds later, the majestic figure of the Guardian emerged from the darkness, a horse of extraordinary stature, a gleaming silver coat, and golden eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom of centuries. On its back, comfortably holding onto its mane, was Ben, smiling as if he were living the greatest adventure of his life. The boy seemed completely at ease, without any sign of fear or discomfort. "My God," whispered Emily, too emotional to contain herself. "He's fine." The Guardian stopped in front of White Rock, its imposing presence dominating the space. Wilson and his men were momentarily paralyzed by the vision, but soon the businessman regained his composure. "Prepare the tranquilizers," he ordered in a low voice. "Be careful with the child." Before they could act, however, Emily emerged from her hiding place. "Ben!" she called, unable to contain herself any longer. "Mommy!" responded the boy, his eyes shining with joy. The Guardian turned toward Emily but didn't show any hostility. On the contrary, it slightly inclined its head, as if in recognition. "Step away from the animal, Dr. Anderson," said Wilson, trying to maintain calm. "It could be dangerous." "The only danger here is you," countered Ryan, who had also emerged from his hiding place, followed by Isabella and the elderly. Wilson seemed momentarily disconcerted by the presence of the group, but soon recovered his confident posture. "We're all here for the same purpose, to rescue little Ben," he argued, trying to control the situation. "My men have equipment that can help restrain the animal without hurting it." "Liar!" exclaimed Grandmother Lucy. "We heard your plans. You want to capture the Guardian for your resort." The businessman narrowed his eyes, abandoning the friendly facade. "This is a unique opportunity," he declared coldly. "A specimen like this is worth millions. Imagine the tourists who will come to the world to see it." "He's not a specimen," intervened Old Joe, stepping forward with surprising authority for someone his age. "He's the protector of this land, part of the soul of Silver Canyon." The Guardian moved to the center of the chamber, positioning itself between the group and White Rock. Ben, still on its back, gently touched the silver mane of the animal as if calming it. "This is ridiculous," scoffed Wilson. "We're in the 21st century. There's no place for superstitions." As he spoke, he made a discreet gesture for his men to advance. One of them quickly raised the dart gun, aiming at the Guardian's flank. "No!" shouted Emily, running toward her son. The moment seemed suspended in time. The man fired the dart, but something extraordinary happened. White Rock emitted a pulse of intense light, and the dart simply deviated in the air, as if it had encountered an invisible barrier, falling harmlessly to the ground. Everyone was paralyzed by the inexplicable phenomenon. The Guardian neighed, the sound echoing through the crystalline walls of the cave, and White Rock responded with luminous undulations that projected images on the rocky walls. Forests being devastated, rivers drying up, animals disappearing, followed by scenes of harmony, prosperity, and balance between humans and nature. "The rock is speaking," murmured Old Joe reverently, "showing what was, what is, and what can be." Ben, as if understanding what was happening, raised his small hands toward the lights. At his imaginary touch, the images became more vivid, more real. "He is the chosen one," declared Grandmother Lucy, emotional, "the child who can see beyond the veil." Wilson stepped back, visibly disturbed by what he was witnessing. His men, equally impressed, lowered their weapons. Taking advantage of the moment, Emily carefully approached the Guardian. The majestic animal inclined its head, allowing her to reach her son. With a racing heart, she extended her arms to Ben, who leaned toward her. "Mommy, horse friend," exclaimed the boy happily as she took him in her arms, hugging him with all the strength of love and relief. Ryan joined them, enveloping wife and son in a protective embrace. Tears of happiness ran freely down his face. The Guardian observed the family scene with apparent approval. Then, to everyone's surprise, it bowed in a kind of reverence before Ben and his family, before turning to White Rock. The light emanating from the giant crystal gradually diminished, but before completely extinguishing, it projected one last image, the silhouette of Ben as an adult, next to the Guardian, both as protectors of Silver Canyon. Wilson, recovering, part of his composure, took a hesitant step toward the group. "What we just witnessed," he began, his voice now devoid of its previous arrogance, "is something the world needs to know." "The world doesn't need to know everything, Wilson," replied Isabella firmly, positioning herself between the businessman and the reunited family. Some things should remain protected. The light of White Rock had stabilized into a soft, constant glow that illuminated the chamber, with opalescent tones. The Guardian remained motionless, its golden eyes fixed on Ben, even as the boy nestled in his parents' arms. "You don't understand," insisted Wilson, his voice oscillating between admiration and greed. "What we have here is extraordinary. Think of the possibilities: sustainable tourism, scientific research, preservation of local culture." "Preservation?" interrupted Ryan, indignant. "We heard your plans. You wanted to capture the Guardian, to exhibit it as an attraction." The businessman had the decency to appear embarrassed. His henchmen, still impressed with the supernatural events they had witnessed, discreetly retreated toward the exit of the cave. "People change," argued Wilson, trying a new approach. "What I just saw changed my perspective." Old Joe, who was carefully observing White Rock, raised his wrinkled hand, asking for silence. The luminous undulations in the crystal had formed a pattern that he seemed to recognize. "The rock is communicating something," said the old man with a reverent voice. "It rarely speaks so clearly." Everyone turned their attention to the phenomenon. Inside the giant crystal, translucent images formed, Silver Canyon seen from above with a specific area glowing more intensely. "It's the Valley of 10 Moons," identified Isabella, surprised. "One of the most remote and unexplored areas of Silver Canyon. And one of the most threatened," added Grandmother Lucy. "There are rumors of plans for illegal mining in that region." Wilson uncomfortably cleared his throat. "Actually, I have information about that. An international group is indeed interested in that area. Rare crystals, I believe." Emily, still embracing her son, faced the businessman with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. "And you're involved in this too?" "I was contacted," he admitted, after a moment of hesitation, "to develop tourism infrastructure that would serve as a facade for the extraction operations." "And you accepted?" questioned Ryan, tense. Before Wilson could respond, White Rock emitted a stronger pulse of light, and the Guardian neighed, the sound reverberating through the crystalline walls. Ben, still in his mother's arms, extended his small hands toward the majestic animal. "Horse sad," said the boy with the simplicity of a child, but a surprising perception. His home hurt. Those simple words seemed to hit everyone with unexpected force. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with meaning. Finally, Isabella spoke. "The Valley of 10 Moons is probably the Guardian's natural habitat, or at least a sacred place for it." "And it's threatened," concluded old Joe, his gaze now fixed on Wilson. "Perhaps that's why the Guardian chose this moment to reveal itself, and chose Ben as a messenger between worlds." The businessman seemed to be fighting an internal battle. His eyes alternated between the majestic Guardian, White, Rock and little Ben. Finally, his shoulders fell in a gesture of surrender. "You're right," he admitted. "I was blinded by ambition. But what I saw today, what I felt here, You can still do the right thing, encouraged Emily, her voice softer now. Wilson straightened up, making a decision. I have contacts, privileged information about the plans for the valley. I can help protect it. Why should we trust you? Questioned Ryan, still skeptical. The businessman looked at the Guardian, then at Ben, and finally at White Rock, which continued to emit its serene glow. Because I, too, am a son of this land, he replied with unexpected emotion. I was born in Silver Canyon, although I've spent decades away pursuing wealth and power. Perhaps it's time to return to my roots. There was sincerity in his voice that was hard to ignore. The Guardian seemed to sense this too, for it slowly approached Wilson, to everyone's astonishment. The imposing animal stopped a few steps from the businessman, its penetrating golden eyes. Wilson, trembling slightly, hesitantly extended his hand. The Guardian allowed the brief touch, a moment of connection that sealed some kind of silent understanding. It's decided then, declared old Joe, observing the scene with approval. The pact is sealed. What pact? Asked Isabella, intrigued. Of protection, replied the old man. The Valley of 10 Moons will remain safe only if we all work together. The Guardian has chosen its allies, a man of influence, he pointed to. Wilson, a protector of nature, he indicated Isabella. The guardians of ancient wisdom, he referred to himself and grandmother Lucy, and a family whose love transcends the material world, he concluded, smiling at Emily, Ryan, and Ben. White Rock pulsed once more as if in agreement, and its lights briefly formed the silhouette of each person present, united in a circle around the Guardian. And what happens now? Asked Emily, feeling they were facing a new beginning. Now, replied grandmother Lucy, we live up to the trust that has been placed in us. As if understanding that the solemn moment had come to an end, the Guardian stepped back a few paces and inclined its head in a final reverence before turning to the tunnel from which it had come. Is it leaving? Asked Ryan, surprised. Only for now, explained old Joe. The Guardian has many paths to travel, many responsibilities beyond what we can understand. Ben, however, didn't seem concerned about the departure. The boy smiled, waving to the majestic animal. Bye, horse friend, Ben, see later. The Guardian gently neighed one last time before disappearing into the shadows of the tunnel, its silver silhouette gradually swallowed by darkness. When they turned their attention to White Rock, they noticed that its glow was slowly diminishing, returning to a state of dormancy, as if it had fulfilled its purpose for now. We need to go back, announced Isabella, consulting her radio. The search teams are worried, and it's getting dark. As they prepared to leave the crystal chamber, Wilson approached Emily and Ryan. If you'll allow me, he said, displaying unprecedented humility, I'd like to talk about how we can use my resources to protect Silver Canyon, starting with the Valley of 10 Moons. Ryan, still distrustful, nodded stiffly. We'll talk, but know that we'll be vigilant. I wouldn't expect less, replied the businessman with a weak smile. As the group left the cave, following the passage that would lead them back to the forest, Ben looked over Emily's shoulder one last time, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the tunnel where the Guardian had disappeared. See you later, friend, whispered the boy, and for a moment everyone could swear they heard a distant neigh respond. 3 months passed since the mystical encounter in the White Rock Cave. Life in Pine Ridge had returned to apparent normality, although nothing was really the same for those who witnessed the extraordinary events of that day. On the porch of their home, Emily watched Ben playing in the garden. The boy, now almost 2.5 years old, seemed more connected with nature than ever. Frequently she found him talking to birds or contemplating the sky with an unusual serenity for his age. He's different, commented Ryan, joining his wife with 2 cups of coffee. More aware somehow. Emily nodded, accepting the drink. Sometimes when I look into his eyes, it's like I see something very ancient and wise. The touch of the Guardian, murmured Ryan, still trying to reconcile his scientific view of the world with the supernatural experiences they had lived through. As a photographer, he had discreetly documented some aspects of that adventure: the mysterious tracks, the inverted waterfall, the entrance to the cave. However, by mutual agreement, among all involved, none of these images had been shared with the outside world. Some things needed to remain protected, as Isabella had said. "Wilson called this morning," commented Emily, changing the subject. "The public hearing about the Valley of 10 Moons will take place next week." Ryan raised his eyebrows, surprised at how quickly things were moving. "He's really keeping his word." "It seems so," she agreed. Isabella confirms that he used his contacts to report the mining plans to the EPA, and according to Old Joe, he bought several strategic properties around the valley to transform them into private reserves. "Who would have thought," reflected Ryan, "that our greatest antagonist would become such a valuable ally?" The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Grandmother Lucy inviting them to a meeting at Old Joe's house that afternoon. "Everyone will be there," she informed with a mysterious tone. "There are important matters to discuss." Few hours later, the family arrived at the old man's modest residence, located on the outskirts of town, close to the entrance of Silver Canyon. To Emily and Ryan's surprise, they found not only Grandmother Lucy, Isabella, and Wilson, but also a group of local elders who rarely participated in community meetings. "Welcome," greeted Old Joe, his fragile figure contrasting with the strength that emanated from his clear eyes. "This is a special occasion." Ben immediately ran to the old man, who received him with an affectionate hug. The two had developed a peculiar connection in recent months, with the boy often repeating enigmatic phrases that sounded like echoes of the elder's wisdom. When everyone was settled in the simple room, decorated with indigenous crafts and old images of Silver Canyon, Old Joe began the meeting with unusual solemnity. "The signs are aligned," he announced. "The first of the 10 Moons approaches." The elders nodded in understanding, while the younger ones exchanged confused glances. "What exactly is this story of the 10 Moons?" asked Ryan, verbalizing the general doubt. "It's a sacred cycle," explained one of the elders, a man with Native American features and completely white hair. "Every 50 years, during 10 consecutive full moons, the veil between worlds becomes thinner in the valley. The Valley of 10 Moons receives this name for a reason," complimented Grandmother Lucy. "During this period, Silver Canyon renews its vital energy, and the Guardian manifests more frequently." Wilson, who was listening with unusual attention, leaned forward. "And what exactly happens during these moons?" "Ancient magic," replied Old Joe simply. "White rock shines with unprecedented intensity, dry springs begin to flow again, rare plants bloom, and the mystical creatures of Silver Canyon gather in celebration." "Mystical creatures?" questioned Emily, divided between medical skepticism and recent extraordinary experiences. "Are there others besides the Guardian?" The elders smiled among themselves as if sharing a precious secret. "Silver Canyon holds many mysteries, Doctor," replied an elderly woman with dark skin and penetrating eyes. "The Guardian is only the most visible of them, the one who chose to reveal itself to you." Ben, who was playing silently with wooden blocks in the center of the room, suddenly raised his head. "Wild Man comes too," he declared with childlike naturalness, "and the river spirit, and the Lady of the Waters." An astonished silence followed the boy's words. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she realized her son had named folkloric entities that he certainly hadn't learned about through books or children's stories. "How does he know that?" whispered Ryan, as surprised as she was. "His connection with the Guardian opened doors of perception," explained Old Joe without seeming minimally surprised. "The boy now sees beyond the veil." Isabella, who until then had remained silent, cleared her throat. "Forgive my pragmatism, but we need to discuss concrete issues. The public hearing is approaching, and we need to be prepared." "You're right," agreed Wilson, assuming his role as strategist. "I have evidence against the companies interested in exploiting the valley, but we need a coordinated plan." The next few minutes were dedicated to practical organization: who would speak at the hearing, what arguments would be presented, how to mobilize the community. At the end of these discussions, Old Joe took the floor again with a more serious tone. "There's something else you need to know," he announced. "The first full moon of the cycle will coincide with the public hearing. It's not a coincidence. It's a sign." "What kind of sign?" asked Ryan. "That our actions will have consequences beyond the material world," replied the old man. "The valley needs to be protected before the first moon. Otherwise the cycle will be interrupted, and the balance of Silver Canyon disturbed." "And what would happen then?" questioned Emily. It was Ben who answered, his childish voice carrying a disconcerting gravity. "Horsefriend goes away forever." At that moment, as if to confirm the seriousness of the situation, a sudden wind blew through the open window, making the candle flames flicker. A distant neigh echoed from outside, so soft that it could easily be confused with the whistle of the wind, but all those present immediately recognized it. "He's watching us," murmured Grandmother Lucy, "waiting to see what we'll do." "Then, let's not disappoint him," declared Wilson with surprising determination. "I have an idea that could guarantee the definitive protection of the valley, but I'll need everyone's help." As the businessman shared his plan, the sky began to darken outside. The first of the 10 moons would soon rise on the horizon, marking the beginning of a period that would forever change the destiny of Pine Ridge and everyone involved in that extraordinary journey. Ben, from his corner in the room, smiled as if he already knew exactly what was to come, his eyes reflecting an ancestral wisdom that transcended his tender age. The night of the public hearing arrived with a palpable expectation that hung over Pine Ridge. The starry sky was dominated by the first full moon of the sacred cycle, its silver glow bathing Silver Canyon with an almost supernatural luminosity. The town's community center had never been so full. Residents, environmental authorities, representatives of mining companies, and local journalists occupied every available space. In the front row, Emily and Ryan sat next to Grandmother Lucy, while Ben played quietly in his grandmother's arms. "I'm nervous," confessed Emily, observing the table where Wilson, Isabella, and EPA representatives were preparing to start the session. "There's a lot at stake." Ryan squeezed her hand in support. "We've done everything we could, now we need to trust." The hearing began with formal presentations and the exposition of mining plans. The representative of the multinational company spoke fluently about sustainable development and minimal environmental impact, words that sounded empty to those who knew the true nature of the Valley of 10 Moons. When it was Wilson's turn, the businessman stood up with a dignity that surprised even those who had witnessed his transformation in recent months. The arrogance of the man who had planned to capture the Guardian was gone. In its place was someone who seemed to have finally found a greater purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I come here not only as a businessman, but as a son of this land. The Valley of 10 Moons is not just another piece of ground rich in minerals, it's the beating heart of Silver Canyon." With precision and eloquence, Wilson presented data on the unique biodiversity of the region, including endemic species that would be threatened by mining. He then revealed documents that proved irregularities in the environmental studies presented by the company interested in the exploitation. "But there's more at stake than we can measure with scientific instruments," he continued, his voice gaining an emotional intensity. "There's the cultural heritage, the ancestral traditions, the sacred relationship that the people of this region have maintained with Silver Canyon for generations." At this moment, Old Joe was invited to speak. The old man, supported by his cane, approached the microphone. Despite his physical frailty, his voice echoed clear and strong throughout the room. "I am the keeper of the stories of this land," he declared. "Stories that my grandfather told, that his grandfather told, and so on for generations. The Valley of 10 Moons is not just a pretty name, it's a place where magic still lives, where the cycles of nature renew and strengthen themselves." As the old man spoke, something inexplicable began to happen. The moonlight entering through the high windows of the community center seemed to intensify, creating a luminous pattern on the floor that resembled the hoof marks of the Guardian. Ben, in his grandmother's lap, pointed to the phenomenon and laughed, a crystalline sound that attracted everyone's attention. "Horsefriend came," he announced, to general astonishment. At the same instant, a powerful neigh echoed from outside, so loud and clear that it could not be confused with any other sound. The doors of the community center opened by themselves, as if propelled by an invisible force, and a gust of wind perfumed with forest aromas invaded the room. Those present looked at each other, confused and amazed. Even the mining representative seemed disconcerted. Taking advantage of the moment, Isabella took the floor. "What we're proposing is not just the denial of a mining project," she explained. "It's the creation of something better, more lasting, and more beneficial for everyone." She then revealed the proposal developed jointly with Wilson, the creation of a private natural heritage reserve that would encompass the Valley of 10 Moons and adjacent areas, with a research center on the biodiversity of the region and sustainable ecotourism. Programs managed in partnership with the local community. "The resources are already guaranteed," assured Wilson, "including financial compensation to current owners." The audience erupted in applause, but the joy was momentarily interrupted when the mining representative stood up, visibly irritated. "This is a farce," he protested. "We're talking about investments of millions, jobs, economic development. We won't abandon this project because of local superstitions." A palpable tension permeated the environment. The man advanced toward Wilson with a pointed finger, but stopped abruptly. Through the window behind the main table, everyone could see the imposing silhouette of the Guardian outlined against the full moon on top of the hill near the community center. The vision lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. Sell. Phones were pulled out to take photos. Exclamations of astonishment echoed, and even the skeptical mining representative paled. "If that's not a sign, I don't know what would be," commented the EPA representative, breaking the silence with a nervous laugh. In the minutes that followed, the hearing transformed into a celebration. The reserve proposal was accepted by acclamation, and the mining representatives withdrew discreetly, defeated not only by arguments or documents, but by something they couldn't rationally explain. While people celebrated, Emily, Ryan, and Ben went outside, followed by Grandmother Lucy, Old Joe, Isabella, and Wilson. On the hilltop, there was no longer any sign of the Guardian, but everyone knew it was nearby, watching. "We did it," whispered Ryan, embracing his wife and son. "The valley is protected." "For now," pondered Old Joe, "the battles for preservation never really end. But today we ensured that the cycle of the 10 moons will be completed, and that's an invaluable victory." 6 months later, on the night of the 6th full moon of the sacred cycle, a small group entered the Valley of 10 Moons. Emily, Ryan, and Ben, accompanied by Grandmother Lucy, Old Joe, Isabella, and Wilson, followed a trail illuminated only by moonlight and small flashlights. The reserve was officially established, and the research center was beginning to take shape. But that night, it wasn't bureaucratic or scientific issues that took them to the valley, but a special invitation. "Are you sure that's what you heard, son?" asked Emily to Ben, who, now almost 3 years old, walked with confidence along the trail, guiding the group with surprising assurance. "Yes, Mommy," replied the boy. "Horse Friend called everyone to see the moon dance." Nobody questioned it. In recent months, they had learned to trust Ben's peculiar insights, who continued to maintain an inexplicable connection with the Guardian, and, apparently, with Silver, Canyon itself. Upon reaching a clearing in the heart of the valley, where White Rock had been reinstalled after careful studies led by Old Joe, they found the place bathed in an ethereal silver light. The giant quartz stone pulsed gently as if it were alive and breathing. "Now we wait," announced Ben, sitting comfortably on the ground. They didn't have to wait long. Soon the sound of hooves echoed through the clearing, and the Guardian emerged majestically from the forest. But to everyone's surprise, it wasn't alone. Other creatures accompanied it, some recognizable like mountain lions and wolves, others of almost mythological appearance, semi-transparent in the moonlight. "The protectors," murmured Old Joe reverently. "They rarely show themselves together." The Guardian approached Ben, lowering its imposing head so the boy could caress its muzzle. The connection between the two was almost palpable, transcending the barrier between species and worlds. "He's happy," translated Ben for the adults. "The valley is safe, and the dance can begin." As if responding to the boy's words, White Rock intensified its glow, and the creatures began to move around it in a synchronized pattern that seemed to accompany music inaudible to humans. The Guardian joined them, its silver coat gleaming under the moonlight. Emily, with tears in her eyes, squeezed Ryan's hand. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "And the most important," added Grandmother Lucy. "We're witnessing the renewal of the pact between worlds, something that happens only once every 50 years. Wilson, who observed the scene with reverence, approached old Joe. "It was worth it," he commented. "Every decision, every sacrifice." The old man nodded, his wrinkled face illuminated by the glow of the rock. "And this is just the beginning, young man. Just the beginning." When the dance finally came to an end, the Guardian approached the human group one last time. In its golden eyes, each saw something different. Emily saw healing and renewal. Ryan, beauty and inspiration. Grandmother Lucy, ancestral wisdom. Old Joe, continuity and tradition. Isabella, balance and harmony. Wilson, redemption and purpose. Ben, however, saw something more complete. A future where humans and nature walked side by side, where the visible and invisible intertwined, where magic wasn't just a word in old stories, but a living, pulsating reality. "Until the next moon, friend," the boy bid farewell. The Guardian neighed in response, a sound that echoed through the mountains of Silver Canyon like a promise. As long as there were those willing to protect the mysteries of the land, the cycle would never be broken. And as the family returned home under the starry sky, Ben fell, asleep in his father's arms, a serene smile on his lips. In his dreams, he galloped freely alongside the Guardian, crossing valleys and mountains, connecting worlds, weaving the invisible to the visible, in an eternal cycle of renewal and hope. "A child guided us," reflected Emily, observing her sleeping. "Son, to a world we had forgotten existed." "Not forgotten," gently corrected Grandmother Lucy. "Just temporarily lost sight of. Sometimes we need a child's eyes to remind us of the most important truths." And so, under the glow of the 6th moon of the sacred cycle, Pine Ridge continued its journey, now more aware of the treasure it kept in its mountains and forests. Not only the exuberant nature of Silver Canyon, but also the ancestral magic that pulsed in its depths, waiting only to be rediscovered by open hearts and eyes willing to see beyond the veil.